Last week's video was how to design a planting plan, but one of the biggest challenges when it comes to designing a planting plan is knowing which plants to use. So this week I thought I'd share some of my favourite plants and planting combinations just to get you started. So without wanting to repeat too much of the video I posted last week, there's a link above if you missed out on that and want to catch up. But one of the first things I need to consider when designing a planting scheme is whereabouts are the plants? Are they within sun or are they in shade? And I thought this was a really great way to split this video. Now I absolutely love planting in shady conditions and there's some great combinations that I'm going to be sharing with you. But for now we're going to be starting off in the sunshine. Back in 2017, this RHS show garden I designed had both sun and shade loving plants. But one evening as I was packing up, I caught this shot as the late sunshine passed through the seed heads of this steeper gigantea, whilst also picking up the vibrant purples and yellows of the lupins that earlier on in the day had seemed hell-bent on drooping. And since then, I've loved this plant and use it regularly, not just in the middle of a border, but also towards the edge. And it works really well if you want to be able to see through it to another part of the garden. But it's not just steeper gigantea that can pick up the sunshine. Check out these steeper tenuissima that also grab their lower sunshine and soften the scheme. Grasses not only look good in summer, but can also look stunning when covered in frost in the wintertime. So whatever you do, don't cut them back until early springtime. And you can see in this shot, I've combined the thicker grass-like leaves of the crocosmia with the steeper, and these create a great contrast to textures. And I think texture has a really important part to play in combining plants, equal to colour at least. In this raised bed I really pushed that theory with the contrast using phormiums, crocosmia and steepers. You can hopefully also see the heads of echinops planted within this as well, which burst through the grasses as they reach for the sun. But that's not to say that colour doesn't have a part to play, clearly. As you can see in this shot, the client really wanted a vibrant theme around their terrace and sunken fire pit area. The combination of the red crocosmia lucifer, the red-tipped pieris contrasting the phormium yellow wave, and the red-stemmed but green-leaf cornice in the foreground. Again, you'll note the steeper tenuissima in the far left, with echinacea popping through. This idea of vibrant or interesting flower heads coming through the grass is one I really like to repeat in many of my schemes. Now this photo is of a freshly planted and quite immature scheme that I designed, and I used the same phormium, a yellow wave, but this time crocosmia George Davidson, which has a more yellow stroke orange flower, and I've contrasted this with the beautiful Salvia caradonna with those amazing purple flower spikes. And this idea of contrasting and complementary colours is just something I want to take 30 seconds quickly just to consider right now. Now you've probably seen this before, whether you realised it or not, but the idea is that the colours are ordered in a primary, secondary and tertiary order and run from cool to warm as you go round. Now you can use the wheel in many ways with the unusual terms such as triadic or tetratic, but for now the easiest and most common idea is complementary colour schemes. With the colour wheel, the best way to see this is the colours that sit opposite each other. For example, red and green, which is probably the best well known. Now these colours look great when they're placed against each other, and so if we want a pleasing colour scheme, this is a great place to start. But back to the plants. Now this is from the same garden as the last image, but in a different bed and a couple of months later on. And you can see how, as well as the crocosmias and salvias, I've also used these hydrangeas to pick up on the white in the surrounding walls and paving, repeating them to create structure for the perennials. Purples and yellow stroke oranges give a contemporary contrast to what are fairly traditionally quite cottage style shrubs. Now I specify hydrangeas quite a bit currently, and as well as in a contemporary scheme, you can go for a plant lover's cottage style scheme like this. Here we did at RHS Tatton using steepers, Artemisia, Astrantia, Achillea, Borovskia and Echinacea. This is more analogous, which means that the colours are next to each other in the colour wheel, and hopefully you can see how this becomes softer and more natural. Further round the garden we repeated certain plants like the Astrantia and Artemisia and added similar colours using alliums, gaura, sanguisorba and geraniums. Definitely not a scheme for a low maintenance garden though. And although these geraniums work well in sun or shade, I love this particular variety, Dreamland, that just fill those little gaps near the edge of a border with their soft pink. The final combination from this particular garden I want to show you is this one where Scabiosa barocca grows through lamb's ears, or Stachyspis xanthina, if you want the Latin name. Geranium Johnson's blue creeping in at the bottom corner, and then again Salvia corydona for a bit of a sharper purple. If you haven't already guessed, I'm a big fan when it comes to salvias, and again here I've combined these with alchemilla, which will tolerate a certain amount of sun, and although not typically thought of as sun-loving plants, these hostas work well together. And I think as well as the colour, it's the textural contrast that makes these stand out so much. Verbena bonariensis are another purple flowering, vibrant, sun-loving plant that, just like Stipa gigantea, allows you to see through, yet gives a stunning display. They'll self-seed though, so be aware that if you don't manage them properly, they'll end up everywhere. Another potentially vibrant plant I often use for gap filling is the vastly variable heuchera. Again, I often associate these with a more traditional garden, but the bright red flowers on this one went so well with the Crocosmia lucifer just behind it, and the deep purple foliage again gave a nice contrast to the majority of green foliage. And if you like heucheras, check out this living wall we installed as part of BBC Gardener World Live at RHS Birmingham in 2015. We also used a juga at the bottom just to cloak the framework, which is a great spreading ground cover plant with small blue flower spikes. Not only did we win a gold medal for this garden, but we also picked up a Best in Show award, and the bees absolutely loved it. And right next to the heucheras, I designed the seating area with a herb bed, and herbs, as well as being great for cooking purposes, can also make a really good looking planting combination. Rosemary gives texture, purple sage or Salvia officinalis again for the foliage, and then chives, part of the allium family, give this lovely little lollipops of colour. And no herb bed with a garden that has pizza oven in it would be complete without oregano. And the final shot from this garden shows water-loving irises and some ferns, a great contrast to the steel and white rendered walls. And ferns bring us on to the other side of the garden, where they're shade-loving or at least shade-tolerant. Now these areas could be particularly dry if they're under a tree canopy or some other type of shelter. Equally, they can be quite damp, especially if the sun doesn't get to them too much. But as with any plant, it's all about the right plant and the right scheme in the right place. One of my favourite planting schemes I've ever worked on was the central shaded area in the Cancer Research UK garden, where I won an RHS gold medal. For me, one of the key benefits of a shaded area is the variety of textures and shades of green you can use. Ferns are probably my favourite plant genus, and in this scheme we use tree ferns as well as smaller plants such as Dryopteris and Asplenium. I then contrasted these feathery textures with some glossy green leaf plants such as the Fatsia japonica, a plant I include in many of my schemes. I then added Pachysandra terminalis for ground cover, as well as Alchemilla mollis and Cornus canadensis, which is a great spreading ground cover. And this wasn't the first time I'd focused on shade-loving plants at an RHS show. In 2017, the Crew's Bereavement Care Garden showcased a great display of plants that will tolerate light shades such as hostas, ferns and aruncus, Stipa tenuissima and lamiums. I also added white foxgloves and white shrub roses, Claire Austin in this case, to contrast the deep black water feature at the end of the garden. We were also lucky enough to borrow this huge tree fern from the local nursery, and then an anemone, ruffled swan, acted as a bit of a gap filler. And then 2 years later we were back at RHS Chatsworth with this garden, in which not only did I underplant this amazing Cornus grisium with a similar palette of anemones, geraniums and ferns, but then we also planted up the piers between the water walls using this living wall setup and focused on Alchemilla mollis, hostas, lamiums, tiarella and ferns. Now, as well as all these lovely perennials and ferns, there's a wealth of shrubs you can use. Viburnum davidii has great interest. I also really like Mahonia japonica, which isn't everyone's cup of tea due to its spiky nature, but don't forget there's always soft caress variety, Mahonia japonica's little brother, with its vibrant yellow flowers and its softer leaves. Topiary can also work well too, although here in the UK we're steering away from buxus or box, now due to the box caterpillar moth, and moving to alternatives such as Pittosporum and Ilex crenata, which look pretty similar, and if you've got slightly deeper pockets, Taxus or Yew is a designer favourite. Now this scheme was in one of the gardens at RHS Tatton Park, but it wasn't from our garden. However, I took this photo and I wanted to include it as it clearly shows again just how good shade-loving planting can be. Tiarella, Brunnera, Aruncus and Rogersia make up the bulk of this scheme, with a few Veronica towards the back to add some colour. Now these are just a selection and a few of the plants that I particularly like with schemes that complement each other. There's going to be loads more. One of the tips that I've got for you that I think is particularly good and has helped me in the past is if you find a friendly nursery or garden centre, one of the best things to do is to go over there and grab a load of the plants, stack them out, put them out together, see what works with what. This way you can come up with your own combinations relatively quickly. A lot of them will have labels on explaining whereabouts they need to be, whether in sun or shade and wet or dry. So it's a great wealth of information. You might even find that some of the staff are prepared to help. And that's it for now. I hope you found that useful. If you did, you may want to subscribe so you don't miss the next video, which will be coming to you very soon, probably next week. If there's anything you want me to talk about or any particular topics that you think I need to cover, then please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, have a great week. See you all very soon.